Okay.
So, for those of you who have been listening in, yes, we'll get underway. I'd like to welcome everybody here. My name is Sarah Stein, and I'm a member of the ODLAA Executive Committee. And ODLAA, I know you're all association members or friends of ODLAA, but it stands for Open Distance and Learning Association of Australia. And that organisation, that professional association, is interested in supporting and discussing and investigating all aspects of those elements: open, distance, flexible, online, all of those kinds of learning at all sorts of levels of education. Today's webinar is the second in ODLAA's webinar series for this year. Each of the webinars is led by an author or authors of one of the articles published in recent editions of the journal called Distance Education, which is essentially ODLAA's journal. A fine journal, a high impact journal, and I do encourage you to think about publishing in that journal in the future, because it's wonderful. Today's presentation is an example of the sorts of reports that get published in that journal. Very practical, but also very well thought out and theoretical, with a strong theoretical underpinning. So I'll get on with it. Today, I'm very pleased to introduce our author for this webinar. We have Christine Plinus with us. Welcome, Christine. Christine is going to talk to you about her research paper called Understanding Vicarious Participation in Online Language Learning. Before we get started and I hand over to Christine, I'm hoping we've got a few people logged in now. Oh, I see 11 people are logged in. Would you mind just taking a moment in chat to introduce yourself, where you're from, and perhaps a couple of words of interest, why you're interested in coming to the session today. And the institution you're from is interesting, but also where you are logging in from. I'm always interested to see if we've got people from all over the place, just to see that. So I'll just give you a moment to log in. Sorry, to add a comment in the chat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you may have to set your chat, brilliant. You may have to set your chat to all panelists and attendees so that actually everybody can see what you're writing. Brilliant.
Hello, Ruth.
Okay, we've got Ruth and Julie from Queensland. So that's just fascinating to see also who's here and where people are logging in from. Mm-hmm.
Hi. Wow.
This from Liberland. Okay, super. Liz, where? Okay, hello, well, welcome. I'll make a start then, and do feel free to carry on. And I also encourage you occasionally during the talk to put little things in the text chat. And then, of course, at the end, we could use it to ask questions, make comments, and hopefully, I assume you'll also then get a microphone now that we can actually have a live discussion. Yeah, and Sarah very kindly said that she might also watch a little bit what's going on in the text chat, because I'm sure I'll be missing things, but maybe also good to leave bigger questions to the end so that we can discuss them right at the end. So I'm very, very pleased to meet you all here, and I'm pleased to read about you in the text chat at least, even though I can't see you. Or can't be together live, which would be even nicer, but I think anyway, very, very nice to meet you. So I'm Christina Plinus, I've already been introduced. I'm from the Open University in the UK, and I will show you exactly where in a minute. It is very late at night here, well past midnight, but luckily I'm a bit of an owl, so that doesn't bother me too much really. And As Sarah said, Understanding Vicarious Participation in Online Language Learning is my title today. So my research is very much related to making use of different ways of learning in online environments, which is of course very, very relevant in these COVID times at the moment. And I study how we can learn in online environments, not only through direct participation and interaction, but also through participating indirectly. And I have the little subtitle here, Learning Through the Learning Experiences of Others, which sounds a little bit spooky, but actually it isn't. So this is what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to introduce briefly how our learners learn at the Open University. I don't want to bore you with describing my institution. It's just that research has happened in a specific context. And I hope that some of the concepts I'll be presenting are actually hugely relevant across many different disciplines and many different learning environments. But some of the findings I'm presenting are also, of course, have very much arisen in a very specific context. But then I'm assuming and hoping that, and know actually from some of you are also working in similar online and distance learning environments. So hopefully some of the things I'll be presenting will chime with you and maybe similar where you are working. I'm going to explain in some more depth the concept I'm talking about, vicarious learning, and give a very brief review of relevant literature related to education, online education and language learning, which is my field, is language learning. And I will present some of the findings from a study I did over the past few years, and then hope to have a discussion with you about the wider implications of what we've been talking about here. So yes, so I'm in this little group of islands is where I am, where I live. I'm originally from Germany, as you may have thought from my name, but I'm now in England, and in fact in that reasonably well-known place. If you have good eyesight in the bottom right, I'm sitting here in London at the moment, and I've been working from home now the past 14 months. I've been only working from my house in London. Normally, I don't always work from home. I work sometimes at home because I work at a distance university. So we do things at a distance, but we do also have a place. We have an office, we have a campus. It's in a town called Milton Keynes. And if you have even better eyesight, you can see it here on a straight line between Oxford and Cambridge, right in the middle. So we're in good company there. So the Open University, originally founded in 1969 as the University of the Air, but despite that, we do have a campus, as you can see in the top left-hand picture. What we don't have on campus is students. We have buildings, we have a canteen, we have very many lecturers, we have administrators, we have some postgraduate students. We have no undergraduates. Our undergraduates study at a distance. The Open University is the largest university in the UK. We have 175,000 students who are spread out across the UK, and a smaller proportion of them also in other countries in Europe. What we do there, we call supported distance learning. And I'm going to say a little bit more about that in a minute, because that relates also to the research I'll be presenting. We get students to enroll for a qualification. So for example, the students I work with and the students who were part of this study I present, most of them are enrolled for a BA in language studies. But then they study on a module by module basis, because as distance learners, often they are part-time students and they combine their studies with very many other commitments. So they often their work, they have families, some are in full-time work and have a family and study. So they have very, very many other commitments which compete with their studies. What they're getting from us are some very structured study materials. And you can also see here, although we are an online distance university, we were founded in 1969 and we have a warehouse And in that warehouse, things are being packed and then they arrive on the doorstep of the students. So at the beginning of their module, the students receive a parcel and they open that box, and it may contain books, or it used to contain DVDs and tapes. And if you study geology, it might contain some rocks or some whole experiment kits. So students receive these things, but of course now they learn increasingly online or only online. The only thing that's obligatory for them, again, that's going to be important later, the only thing they have to do is they have to do their assignments. So we don't look over their shoulder whether they actually work their way through their carefully structured study materials or what they do with the things that may arrive in a box. The only thing that's obligatory is they have to hand in assignments. They're sent in electronically at regular intervals, and they're marked by a tutor. And the students have a tutor, and this is where the supported bit comes from, supported distance learning. They all have a tutor. They can talk to their tutor. They can email their tutor. They have contact in forums, and the tutor gives very, very detailed feedback to their assignments. The tutors also run tutorials. Typically, our modules are quite big, so there are many students, but also many tutors. So students have the opportunity to attend tutorials with several different tutors, and they have a bit of a choice which tutorials they want to attend. They do, of course, have a virtual learning environment, Moodle-based, and all in all, at the Open University, what is a really, really strong focus on online learning design. So, I mean, I work at the School of Language and Applied Linguistics, which is sort of an academic department, but we have departments which are entirely focused on online learning design, either from a research perspective or from a learning design, how do we design the learning for our students kind of perspective. And of course, as you know, of course, these things, the warehouse and the box have, lost a lot in importance in recent years, and modules are largely online. Some are online only, some still have some books, and it's the module website, which is sort of the hub of the course. We call it the hub of the course. The students have this study calendar week by week. They can see what they do, but they also access interactive tools, and they are very, very much encouraged to interact and collaborate with other students, and they have forums, they have other interactive and collaborative tools they can use as part of their studies. And I was already talking a little bit about tutorials, and that is what's very central here to the things I'll be presenting. They have synchronous online tutorials. Pre-COVID, they still had a mixture of face-to-face. They were sometimes run in various places across the UK, but of course they were also getting rarer, and the majority of tutorials are online. So now in these pandemic times, of course, absolutely everybody has synchronous online tutorials. Everybody offers tutorials on Zoom, on Microsoft Teams. But at the Open University, we've been doing it for longer. So we've been doing it for over 20 years now, that the first pilot projects were run. And in the year just before COVID, there were actually, I got some data from our data team, there were 25,000 synchronous online sessions were being run for our students in 1 year. Yeah, 25,000. So we do have a lot of them. And of course, in languages, they are very important to us as well, because we want our students to interact and engage and actually use, the language they are learning. And here is a little example what it looks like. And you can see this is Adobe Connect software, which is specially adapted for, what we wanted. It has a lot of functionality. You can speak, you can, you see that there can be a whiteboard. Students can take part in polls. They can also write or draw on the whiteboard. They can use emoticons. And you can see it's a real multimodal environment. You can see at least 4, bits of written information on the PowerPoints, on the notes the tutor makes, and on the chat. And you can see the attendees' names. I've taken them out. What you don't see, and you might want to ask about, is video. So it is possible to use video. For many years, we've hardly used it because we always thought it is already a very, very rich environment. There is already a lot to see, a lot to listen to. Do we need video? But of course, more recently, I mean, the previous seminar in this series was about our social presence. And that is, of course, a concept that also our tutors are now much more aware of. So we are moving much more towards at least the tutor actually showing their face and opening their video window. What's interesting is also students are asking sometimes about video and are saying, would it not be much better if we saw each other, if we had video? I'm saying that's interesting because I know from colleagues in traditional face-to-face universities who had to move their teaching online that they get a lot of the opposite as well, i.e. the tutor trying desperately to get their students to turn on the video and the students won't. But yeah, we do get comments about lack of video sometimes. So these synchronous online tutorials are sometimes recorded. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. And when you play the recording, you get a very, very similar experience to actually being in the room. Students describe it in different ways. Some feel more remote when they watch a recording. They say, oh, it's a little bit weird. They say, oh, it's like going to an event that's already in the past. One student said it's like looking in a shop window. But many students also say it's almost as if you were there. It's almost as if you were there. And you can see on this screen, there are 11 attendees. So if you're in a group of 11, you're also sitting there most of the time, maybe just listening. You know, maybe you can't always with 11 others. Most of the time you'll be listening. No, you won't be the one talking. So, you know, and then if you listen to the recording, really, it's almost as if you were there and you see all the content in the recording. So having said that, there are huge discussions about whether such sessions should be recorded. There is a very strong feeling from very many tutors that tutorials are for practice, for trying out ideas in a small group, in a private space, and that they should protect their students from being recorded. However, student opinion, whenever you are student in whatever consultative forum, survey, whatever, the majority of student opinion is always very, very keen to have recordings. And that, I think, is interestingly reflected also in the huge discussions that are going on generally in the sector, in the higher education sector, around lecture casts and recordings. And now with COVID, everybody, I mean, if they didn't have lecture casts, that would have been really bad, no? So, but, you know, before COVID, certainly these huge, huge discussions going on. And I would certainly think we do have a little conundrum here, because considering that tutorials are aimed at promoting language learning and cultural understanding through active participation and interactive use of the target language, it's not immediately obvious how learners can benefit from listening to the event in retrospect. You see some of it is very specifically related here to language learning, interactive use of the target language, but I would argue in other subjects too, small group tutorials are for dialogue between tutor and student, between students, and they are for learning through active participation. So that is something that also applies to other subjects. So this is the question I'm asking at the beginning, and I'd now like to talk a little bit about the concept I'm interested in. And so my question really, okay, we can understand maybe there's a practical reason for doing recordings. You know, if someone's, you know, didn't get up early enough for the lecture, then they listen to the recording. But could there also be, is there a pedagogic rationale, which is what many tutors argue there isn't. They say the pedagogic rationale is not for recording because, you know, it really isn't obvious how learners can benefit. So I would like to talk a little bit about this concept I got interested in many, many years ago. I first heard the term vicarious learning and it intrigued me. I thought it's actually really relevant to my distance learning context. So the definition I'll be using in this talk for vicarious learning is from an educationalist, Lee, who says vicarious learning arises in situations where a learning experience is witnessed and reacted to as a learning experience by another learner. So to give some examples which are not from an online context, here there is a little project group and there's 4 of them, and 2 are talking and 2 are not talking at the time. But presumably the 2 who are not talking are actually listening and overhearing and are also thinking about the project and about what is being said by the others. So they are kind of also learning. And also this really, I like this picture very, very much. I have 2 left hands. I cannot absolutely not put up any shelves. But I think, you know, watching those 2 people put up that shelf, I would be learning an awful lot, because it will give me a little bit of time watching them doing it not quite so perfectly. I would think, what would I do myself? I would think, which bit should they actually now pick up next? And I would learn an awful lot from that, more than from any glib sort of instruction video, you know, how to set up your IKEA shelf. So these just 2 examples how we can learn through, you know, from a learning, from somebody else's learning experience. And the background, of course, is this is a concept coming from psychology. It was created by Bandura, who and was really originally just 1 step away from behaviorist theory, you know, that we learn through stimulus and response. And then the idea, yeah, actually, no, as human beings, we don't just learn through stimulus and response. We can learn in other ways too, for example, through observing others. And from that, Bandura developed his socio-cognitive theory, saying human functioning is directly or indirectly socially mediated. Learning is both cognitive and social, and the agentic perspective comes to the fore. The human mind is generative, creative, proactive, and reflective. And these theories have then been used in education, and this idea of, you know, learning from dialogue. And in the late 1990s, early 2000s, there was a group of educational researchers, among them Lee, whose definition you've just seen, who studied how learners learn through observing recorded tutor-student dialogue. So they recorded dialogue between tutor and student in a range of subjects, social science, engineering, and then studied how students who were listening to this tutor-student dialogue were learning from it. And they found an alignment of cognitive processes through emphatic response, so that the listeners were really, they had this emphatic response to the other learners, and thought that watching peers leads to deep learning gains. Some studies showed that dialogic resources with dialogue led to more learning than resources which were just a monologue. And of course, monologues, recorded monologue, very, very trendy at the moment as well. You know, recordings made by teachers, little 3-minute screencasts, that kind of thing, really, really trendy. You know, so the sort of the argument is that dialogue, and these what they were saying is that dialogue kind of externalizes the learning process, and by accessing, listening to this dialogue, that this can facilitate deep learning. Of course, there are also an awful lot of discussions around forums and this concept of lurking. Now, that's been described a lot, discussed a lot, initially, of course, very negative terms, someone lurks. But for many years, you know, people have not been seeing it in quite such a negative way. So Salmon calls it browsing, prefers to call it browsing, and says this could be the first step to more active engagement. And more recently, Smith and Smith more actually saying passive engagement is a valid way of learning, and we should recognize that. And of course, you may already be thinking the theories around communities of practice with their legitimate peripheral participation is also a related concept, that peripheral participation precedes full participation, that you need this step in your learning process. What I really like also, and it relates to this empathic response to other learners, is this kind of phrase, learners like me. If you watch something, you observe something, okay, you're not there, you're not participating directly, but you do see learners like me. And I brought you here a little quote from Mills, she's also studying language learning, but also from a perspective of learner agency. And she says vicarious experiences, or the appraisal of abilities in relation to the accomplishment of peers, are an additional source of self-efficacy beliefs. Visualizing the successes of comparable individuals in terms of age, level, and ability can raise a person's efficacy beliefs by fostering the belief that he or she could also master comparable tasks. But then what about language learning? Because language learning is something a little bit special again. In language learning, we really do want students to interact. There are whole interactionist theories, also output theories, that learners' learning is really pushed forward when learners themselves speak, when learners themselves have some kind of linguistic output. However, both cognitive and social theories in language learning also acknowledge covert learner activity as a driver of language learning. So the biggest study of that was done by Amy Ota now 20 years ago, who did a classroom study where she recorded everything that went on in her classroom, and she transcribed what learners overheard, what conversations they took part on, when they used sort of subvocal speech, which was only just audible, and came to conclusions that, unencumbered by the demands of production, listeners have more attentional resources at their disposal to actually attend to the input they receive. And that is also one argument that was made by some of the educational researchers, that sometimes those students who observed the dialogue learned because they had more attentional resources at their disposal. Because if you take part in interactions, a lot of your attention is actually taken up by participating actively in that interaction. And I do like this quote also by Fernandez Dobao, who did group work with small groups of learners and made sure there were always more than two, that there were always some learners who were just observing what was happening. And there's a private space emerges in which the silent learner, through subvocal private speech, can repeat, manipulate, internalize the vocabulary afforded by the interaction. And she showed that she's got measures how she showed how both the participants but also the overhearers actually benefited from the so-called language-related episodes they were observing in that particular study. So I'm very briefly now moving on to what I studied and how at the Open University. So I did study students who were listening to recorded tutorials of the type where I showed you the picture previously. And I had all in all 6 questions. And I'm now talking about results of these 4 who in this context actually accesses recorded online tutorials. Why do they do that? And what are the perceived benefits for language learning and the perceived benefits, affective or motivational benefits? And I just show you my methodology, and maybe you can just read through this yourselves. Yeah. So yeah, so I had, 4 modules are quite big. So for quantitative data, I had just under 1,000 students I was able to analyze. There were some missing attendance records. That's why those numbers are slightly smaller than the other numbers. They were all in all, there were 977 students. And then I conducted semi-structured interviews with 13 of those students from these modules. Yeah, so, and I'm going to present, what I just want to draw your attention again is those 3 bullet points, the 3 types of quantitative data which I collected, which are the user analytics, module result data, and demographic data, because I'm going to present just one slide on each of them with one result that relates to each of those 3. So firstly, who access recordings, and that's where the context kind of plays a role. So these are all the students, 964, and I already said previously, nothing is obligatory in our courses apart from the assignments. So the tutorials are not obligatory, of course, especially in languages, we encourage students very, very much, and we think that's where student could learn the language. Also, some tutorials relate to assessment, and students have to do assessment. However, not all of them do engage with the tutorial. So these are the students who have attended at least one, that's not even very strong engagement, at least one live tutorial. Yeah, so this is, just over half of the students, good, getting on for 60% or so, but have attended at least one live tutorial. But all the bit in dark blue here, these students, they never engage with the tutorials. They never come to the tutorials. So the big question we're asking, my colleagues are asking, those students who access recordings, and maybe you're welcome to have a guess or put it in the text chat or something, are they the ones who never attend the tutorials and so they can't be bothered really, so they just listen to the recordings, or are they the students who also attend live? And this is, I think, which is very different in different contexts. So in our distance learning context, where these tutorials, they are not obligatory, the students choose to go to the tutorials, and the answer is very, very clearly, they are the students who also attend live. So live attendance is the greatest predictor for what I call here vicarious attendance, i.e., watching the recordings. It's the live attenders who also watch the recordings, only a very small number who never attend live and only sometimes go to the recordings. And this is also supported very, very strongly by the data I get from the interviews, who are all derived from the students in the green dot in the middle, those who've accessed recordings. And they all say they do so because they find tutorials central to their studies. So whereas some of the studies on lecture capture from traditional universities come out with results that students actually go there instead of going to lectures. They go there in order to avoid going to lectures. This here in this distance learning environment, very, very strongly, these are students who find tutorials central to their studies. Next question, something that exercises the community a lot who are actually studying lecture casts, is assessment and attainment. So who access recordings? Are they compared to assessment results? Are they, feel free again to have your own guess. Are they the better students? Are they the poor students? Are they the plain normal students? Who are these students? What are their assessment results like? And there are endless studies, lots and lots of them, relating to use of lecture casts in traditional universities and, how it relates. And they come up with very, very conflicting results. So in our distance learning environment, it's not totally simple. So first to say this is a correlation, is not causation. So I'm not saying one thing causes the other, or because they attend, they get better grades. I wasn't able to show that. So I should only show a correlation. So there is a correlation between live attendance and assignment grade. Students who attend live get better grades, or I said it's not causative, but yeah, their grades are better, and is a very strong, is highly, highly significant. There is also a correlation between recording use and grade. It is also highly significant, slightly less so, but it is also highly significant. However, it is due to the correlation between recording use and live attendance. So if you check out live attendance and control for recording use, then that effect on live attendance on assignment grade is still significant. But if you go to recording use and control for live attendance, then that is just not significant anymore. So I cannot say that students have higher grades who use recordings. So more likely it is more the average students who use recordings, although together live attendance and recording use, those students definitely have higher grades. Yeah, from the qualitative data, of course, I then try to think about that and think about the why, this is the who, this is a bit, think, okay, why, why? I think from the qualitative data, what I take from those is that on the one hand, those students who use recordings are very highly motivated and they're very keen to learn and they want to do well in their assignments. So they are these kinds of students. However, they are often students who struggle with some aspects. So for example, they might say, oh, I find listening really hard. Or they say, oh, sometimes I struggle, one of them said. So yeah, so links to assessment, not so clear cut. And finally, I want to show you one of my demographic results. So I checked all the usual demographics, so gender, age, ethnicity, educational attainment, socioeconomic group, disability. And again, maybe you could start thinking about, do you think there's any effect, are any of these students more likely, to access this sort of recorded material? And I must say I was surprised, although I don't think, why was I surprised? It's so obvious. So I had one result that was really, really highly significant. I don't know what you're all thinking here. Now maybe you think, maybe gender, sometimes the women, they do have better assessment results. And it's true, there was, if you looked very carefully, there was possibly something a tiny bit going on with women. Then also disability, that's what all my colleagues predicted. They say, oh, recordings, only the disabled students go, yeah. And that was not true. So the one group I found, age. So the older, and a very clear trend. So not only highly significant differences between old and young, but a very clear linear trend. And now you'll all sit there saying, yeah, that's because, the over 55s, maybe they're retired, they have so much time, they have nothing better to do, so they listen to a bit of these recordings. But I really tried this in all different variations. So I tried taking out all the retired students. I ran it with only students who said they were in full-time employment. And every single time it had this sort of highly significant linear upwards trend. The older, the more likely they were to listen to recordings. And now, of course, I'm thinking, I've now since been reading a lot of literature also around older language learners. And that, of course, those things where learners struggle more, simultaneous processing speed, working memories, all these things that are needed in live interaction. Also listening becomes much harder. So maybe it is actually not surprising that for these learners, it is particularly helpful to sometimes participate in interactions indirectly. But at the time, to me, that was a really surprising result. To move on a little bit from this quantitative data to that, then what I explored qualitatively, I think what comes out there is that students really see overlapping and complementary benefits from different tutorial modes. And I think that's where it gets interesting for us if we think about online learning design. We design our online learning, what opportunities should we create for our learners, how should these opportunities link be linked, you know. So this really sort of, and one learner, someone was saying the mix, you should keep the mix. Sorry, I can't find that quote now, but, you know, really learners, you know, strongly saying different, you know, complementary benefits, which also overlap. I then wanted to look at this in a more structured way and find out what motivates learners actually to attend these different tutorial modes. And so I looked at all the different things, you know, and I went through thematic analysis and I tried to put it together in different ways. But so what I came up with is, first of all, this is the premise, is what I talked about at the beginning. So these are learners who study at a distance university. They're independent learners. They have a high volume of study materials they're meant to be working through, and they have to pass assignments at regular intervals. However, there is a lack of opportunities for interaction for these learners. They do have their course forums and that, but not everybody also engages with them. And it's certainly something that learners always say. And even if we say, but you have your course forum and you have this and you have this, they always come with this, oh, that there's a lack of opportunities for interaction. So these learners, which were the learners which had actually accessed the recorded tutorials, and who all 13 of them said, I do it because I find tutorials so central to my studies. So these learners, they expressed a great need for sort of structure and guidance as independent learners, and therefore found tutorials to be central, you know, and that's what every single one they come with. It's paramount. It's so vital. You couldn't do without them, you know, which, yeah. And of course, they have two ways how they can attend tutorials. And again, everything is, you know, voluntary. We don't force them. These are offers for them, open for them. We don't force them. So they can attend live or they can listen to the recordings. And I was interested in the motivators and barriers for doing these things. So there are some very strong motivators for attending live, very strong, for language learning, interacting in the target language, meeting tutor and peers, enjoyment, asking questions. And it's a scheduled event. So it serves to structure your learning. You know, it's on that date, everybody will be there. So I go there too. However, scheduled, of course, can also be a barrier, because these are all the learners with all the competing and conflicting demands from their jobs, from their families. Some of them are carers, some of them are themselves not well. So being a scheduled event can also present a barrier. You know, a barrier in terms of time, family circumstances, work commitment, health, clash with other modules, all these things can come in the way of attending a scheduled event. Also technology, sometimes it doesn't work and sometimes it doesn't work at the right time. And also anxiety, some learners express anxiety about attending live events. And then these sort of barriers then indirectly send the learners to listen to the recording. So these are kind of indirect motivators why learners may listen to recordings. There are also some barriers related to recordings, but what I'm really interested as well are the actual direct motivators, because there are also some direct motivators why students go to the recordings. One was related to different voices and perspectives, that students were saying, you hear more different voices and perspectives. It's of course easier to access lots of recordings than go to lots of tutorials, because the live tutorials, they're at a specific time, you have to register for them, you have to then be there from the beginning to end. It would be quite rude to leave in the middle. The recordings are more flexible, of course, you know, you can see what you do. And since saying is really interesting, it's a different tutor, he uses the same PowerPoints but gives a different angle on them. So there's sort of different perspectives, and there's different students too and perspectives, and also for consolidation and reflection, you know, that these are the direct motivators why students go to these recordings. And I take from that and from what they're saying that actually the recordings serve to make the interactive input, which is within the tutorial, make it more useful for learning. So Rebold said this really, really nicely, they're increasing the value of tutorials by capturing what is usually ephemeral and allowing learners to process material to support their learning. And now finally, I just brought you a few more quotes from what the participants said, because they were very, very aware of the different strengths and weaknesses of the different tutorial modes. So this one says, in a live session, you're participating, the other students are participating, you're taking a theme, you're growing it, you're exploring it between you, you've got combined brains added to it. You can ask the tutor, ask questions about anything. In a recording, you can obviously stop, you can go back, you can take time, you can take notes. So a lot of awareness, of, what the different tutorial modes actually do. And also, I think listening can be quite active, actually. I don't feel passive at all. In fact, I can feel more passive taking part in an online tutorial if I don't feel I've quite got the level of Spanish to cope with. And very obvious as well how learners seem to go to try and find input that supports their learning. So there are some who go for only the first language tutors who, speak very fast, and some who go to tutors who speak more slowly, and some who really like it when the other students are really good, and they can think, and some who really like students who speak slowly. So learners very actively going to trying to find the input that facilitates their own learning. And benefits to language learning, they're related to, some of them, they're related to understanding, they're related to deeper processing, and they're related to noticing, which is an important concept in language learning for the students. Use actually hearing the mistakes and sort of processing them. Sometimes the learners don't actually know how and what they're learning. It's quite interesting. So for example, someone was saying, oh, obviously, it doesn't help with the speaking. And then later she says, yeah, and what I notice much more now in the recordings is I notice people using the subjunctive. So now I'm using it more myself as well. So obviously she, in a noticing, and she describes how the noticing then actually led to her own active use. Most also describe instances of vicarious participation, i.e. that they kind of took part, they answered questions in their head, subvocally, in different ways. They did what the other students were asked to do in the tutorial they were observing. And they also reported motivational benefits. This one also linked to the previous one. I felt easily I could have been part of the group. I could have kept up with them. And for me, it's so that I don't feel like I'm learning all by myself, although I actually am. As such, I'm still part of the group. Without recordings, I would have felt a little bit lost. Students with disabilities who wasn't able to attend in the evening. Yeah, and that's really so really final, and better come to an end to have a bit of time for discussion. I'd like to read out a tiny bit what I put at the end of the article. So as university learning is changing and the move to better online provision has become pressing, the need to design for learning in a way which enables the meaningful integration of different study elements to support students' academic development and keep them connected to their community of teachers and learners is non-negotiable. So I think I would like to ask how can our understanding of the possible cognitive, social and affective benefits of direct and vicarious participation feed into online learning design? And I think we also need to consider the concerns, the very valid concerns that exist. And quite a while ago, Thorne talked about new learning spaces, which are blurring the boundaries between space and time, private and public, real and virtual. So we are now turning this synchronous interaction into an asynchronous resource for others. And I think we must also ask, how can we address these valid concerns about privacy and provide spaces for unobserved practice while also making use of the learning opportunities afforded through combining direct and indirect participation. So thank you ever so much for listening. I'm hoping for some good discussion. My little ghost is coming back and then he's leaving again.
Aww.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. That was wonderful. Everybody's got access to their microphones now, so please speak up. I think, Liz, you have something to say if you've got a question or comment.
Look, thank you very much. That was a fantastic presentation. I guess, I mean, we definitely have these issues in our online space. We have the tutorials like you that are not compulsory. We also have discussion boards that we are trying to use them to connect the students and also to connect them to faculty as well. We've had some success with our discussion boards, but this idea of allowing the students to learn by watching recordings, this vicarious learning, I guess I hadn't thought enough about that. I'd always just put it in the passive learning, that that's sort of the backup for their learning, and we really do try to encourage them to come to the tutorials so they can interact.
Yes.
Yeah. I guess if I could ask you just if you wouldn't mind exploring a little bit, we record our tutorials, but we stop about halfway. So we do the knowledge and information, but after about half an hour, we say we're going to turn the recording off.
Yeah.
So I guess we're trying to hedge our bets with a little, they can watch the recording, but there is actually a benefit to attending the tutorial where they get some more one-on-one and some more sort of off-air time. What do you think of that idea?
Yes, yes. I think that, yeah, of course, we have played with those ideas a lot as well. I think, yes, yeah, so that they get something in addition. Yes. I also think, however, learners are also quite good at knowing. I think this depends very much on context, you know, because maybe we've got these learners, they're also slightly older. They come, they learn at a distance. They seem to be very good at deciding for themselves how they want to learn and how they think they learn best. So personally, so we also have, of course, our tutors very, very keen to engage, just as you say, to have this live engagement. And I totally agree with them. We want all the students, as many as possible, to come to the live tutorials. What I don't think, certainly not in this context I was just presenting, that providing recordings keeps people away from the live tutorials. I think sometimes it's a stepping stone because some students are anxious. Sometimes students like going to tutorials where they know they can then, they don't have to take notes all the time. They can always listen to it afterwards. So I don't think that in our context, these recordings of the small it's also quite a long thing. You also have to then dedicate an hour and a half as well to listen to the recording. So a lot of students think, I might as well go live now. So I am not sure it actually distracts from, you know, going to the live tutorials. But I see what I mean, what you mean. And certainly we also have, you know, think around, you know, how do we make students come to our sessions? Yes. But we have, for example, now also said that, for example, we have a lot of students who don't attend because they feel anxious, that what we're going to do, we're going to do a recording with a few volunteers, and we're going to post that right at the beginning of the course. You know, we're going to post this, you know, interactive recording. And we're going to say to students, look, these are our tutorials. They're not scary. This is what you can expect when you join. Because sometimes there's this hurdle for students to join. But yes, I agree, doing some content which is not in the recording seems good. What seems a little bit sad to me is if always the discussion gets taken out, because that's common practice also where I am. You know, the lecture is recorded, but not the discussion, but often is the discussion where you do the learning. So that always seems a bit sad to me.
Thank you for that great question, Liz, because
very good question. Yeah. And I think very good point, you know, to offer them something in the live session that they really don't get out of the recording.
Margaret has a question. Margaret, would you like to ask yours? Margaret has her hand up. Margaret Simpson. Okay, perhaps she's just stepped away for a moment. The thing that I'm particularly interested in, well, first of all, a big thank you for directing our attention to that literature on vicarious learning, because like, as you said, I had assumed, and Liz said, you just assume that it's not something. Jay in the chat made the point, well, his comment was, I wonder if there's something here about the way we prepare students for learning, the way we outline responsibilities for learning. And I was thinking then, that prompted me to think about the typical sort of academic skills programs we often offer to students, how to read a journal article, how to compose a journal article, how to engage in a lecture, or do we ever think about skilling them up in how to work with recordings of lectures or tutorials or whatever? I'm not sure we do. We certainly don't at my institution. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, that certainly, if I can come in, as that is a matter of the learning design, which I've been thinking that all these at the traditional university, all these lecture casts, you know, and there's so many of them and they sit somewhere. And really what you'd want to do is say, okay, we're having a lecture cast session, you know, and people can come and they re-listen to something they found hard, you know, and they do it together, and then they could discuss it, or they could, you know, I don't know, that you actually make more of it and that it actually gets included in the learning design. Because at the moment, what's happening at the university, which all do their lecture casts, there is no, you know, it's a bit unthinking, no, they're all being produced, you know, but it is not integrated in any kind of, you know, pedagogic rationale or learning design.
Yes, yes, I think I agree. Margaret's right now. She's ready to have a go. Please, Margaret, your turn.
Unmute now.
Okay.
Sorry. Hello.
No, we can
Hello?
hear you. No, can
oh,
hear
good.
You,
okay.
Margaret.
It was just I was muted. That's why, from the central thing. I think that's all right. So sorry about that. Listen, I'd like just to start to say thank you. It kind of wowed me, your whole presentation. It had a lot of resonance for what we experience at TAFE Digital, being a very similar journey to what you've described, where we were distance education, but predominantly more that hard copy, mail out version. And over the years, we morphed into now pretty much totally online, except for workplace requirements. We do deliver to the vet sector rather than a university. We do have a couple of higher ed courses that are running, but predominantly it is those lower qualifications. But your research is very much similar to what we experience, either maybe not so sophisticatedly research that you've done. I take it that, and I may have actually got this wrong, but your learning is very structured learning, where you have a linear start and end, and everyone's progressing at the same stage, like a lockstep approach. Is that correct? And
in a way, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. See, we have an anytime enrolment concept, which puts another layer of complexities into that. It's about how do you target those key concepts and deliver it to students in a meaningful way when they're all at different stages of their training.
Yes. Yes.
And our what we do see is the ones that do attend always seem to do well, whether they're there because they're motivated, because they're anxious, they're, you know, been away from that learning sphere a lot in the past, or they you know, they're just those high achievers. I don't know so much. I think that, you know, it stands to reason. If you attend class, you know, you're going to progress. If you don't attend, you'll have more hurdles. One of the big problems that we do face is digital literacy skills. It is enormously enormous barrier for students, regardless of their cohort that they might fit into, but it is a challenge. Do you have that similar kind of experience, and how do you address that?
The digital literacy skills. I mean, we have an amazing library who has amazing digital literacy skills resources. We've also found that this is something that has moved on a lot over the years. So I don't know, maybe this is specific again to us. First of all, our students are becoming younger. They used to be older, they're now becoming younger. And of course, they are now more used to the online learning as well. So when we first moved to more and more online, I mean, there was a lot, you know, it was quite difficult in many cases. Now we find these skills are improving, and we do incorporate them into our courses right from the start. When students start, sort of that they, you know, that we introduce them gradually to some of the digital literacy skills, and the digital literacy skills are part. So that's in languages. It's possibly not in all the faculties, but in languages we have a curriculum now which includes all these skills really as an integral part of the courses, because we find that students otherwise, as you say, they can't really use the tools we try to give them in a good way. So we are trying to incorporate that, but of course we are also still coming across, you know, students struggling, or students not being able to also interact as well as we would like them to.
I'm going to interrupt. I'm sorry. I just realised we're a couple of minutes over now, and people will be wanting to get there. But thank you so much, Christine, for your time, and especially as it's past midnight for you now. Thank you to everybody else in the audience for coming along and those great questions. Have a good day. And Christine, were you going to say something? Oh,
no, I just want to say thank you. It was lovely meeting you, Sarah, and it was lovely meeting the people in the room a tiny little bit, you know, through your contributions. And thank you so much for the questions. And yeah, very interesting. Yes, and as you're right, as someone said, really more questions than answers. No, but I think it's just something, you know, it's just something to think about. And I think about it a lot, for example, when I see all these screencasts now, all these videos made by teachers, which is yet another way of, you know, talking at students. And I always say, can we include a student perspective? Could we have a student there who talks to you, so that it all becomes a little bit more of a dialogue? Yes. But yeah, thank you ever so much. Thank you for letting me present here. It was very, very interesting for me. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Christine. We'll say goodbye then.
Okay.
Bye-bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye-bye.